I live alone in a small house in the suburbs with a dog named Max, a smart, gentle, and loyal mixed-breed dog. I noticed something strange about 3 months ago. Max always stayed away from the living room. No matter how many times I called him, he just stood at the doorway, whining softly and looking inside with fearful eyes. At first, I thought maybe he heard a mouse or smelled something that made him uncomfortable. But gradually, I realized that this was not the normal reaction of an animal. Max was never afraid of the dark. He used to run around the backyard in the middle of the night without flinching. But every time he approached the living room, he would shrink his neck back and sometimes even growl as if someone was in there. I started to pay more attention. The living room is where I usually sit to watch TV or read books. There's nothing special about the furniture. The only thing left is an antique mirror hanging on the wall that I bought from a second-hand store a few months ago. I like vintage items, so I didn't think much of it. It had an intricately carved wooden frame that reflected the soft yellow light of the ceiling lamp. One rainy evening, I sat on the sofa reading a book. The sound of rain falling outside the window made the space more gloomy. Max lay curled up in the hallway, his eyes still glued to the living room. Suddenly he stood up and growled. I raised my head to look in the direction of his eyes, but saw nothing but the mirror. Lightning flashed on the glass, reflecting my image, sitting there in the same room, but for a split second, I caught a glimpse of something like a human shadow standing behind me. I jerked back. There was only a cold void and the sound of rain hitting the roof. I reassured myself it was probably due to the light and fatigue. I petted Max, trying to calm him down, but he kept moaning. His eyes seemed to be trying to warn me of something. That night, I had trouble sleeping, thinking about the shadow in the mirror. The next morning, I tried an experiment. I placed Max's food bowl right in the middle of the living room. He stopped to look at me, then looked at the food bowl, but absolutely did not step over the threshold. He started barking fiercely. The barking echoed in the empty house. I suddenly shivered, feeling like the surrounding air was thick and cold. A light breeze blew by, even though the window was closed. I approached the mirror. The light from the window shone in, creating a strange streak of light on the glass surface. It seemed like there was a slight movement inside the mirror, like a mist spreading from deep inside. I stood still for a few seconds, then pulled my hand back when I felt a cold chill pass through my skin from a distance of less than a meter. It felt like someone was watching me from the other side of the glass. That night, while I was sleeping, Max suddenly barked loudly. I jumped up and ran down to the living room. The lights flickered a few times and then went out, leaving only a dim moonlight shining through the curtains. I saw Max's shadow standing in the doorway, his fur standing straight up, his ears perked up, and his eyes glued to the mirror. I approached to turn on the light when I heard a soft sigh coming from inside the room. I froze, my hand stopped, and I stared at the mirror. For a moment, I clearly saw a figure standing in there, but the figure was blurry like smoke. I stepped back. The light suddenly turned back on, but there was nothing left. Only Max and I were trembling with fear. From that day on, I began to hear strange sounds every night, like light footsteps or whispers coming from inside. From the living room, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Max didn't go into that room, not because of irrational fear, but because it saw something I couldn't see, and it seemed like the creature was still here, watching us every night in silence, like a part of the house coming to life in the darkness, waiting for me to discover even more terrifying truths. After that night, I started to have trouble sleeping. I no longer felt safe in my own house. Every time I passed the living room, I felt like someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it as just my imagination, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more clearly I could hear the soft sounds coming from the mirror-like sighs and very light footsteps, as if someone was moving in another space that I couldn't reach. Max was getting more and more unstable. He refused to eat when the bowl was placed. Near the living room door, even at night, he moaned continuously. I was used to living alone, so his presence was the only comfort, but now I was no longer at ease when I saw him trembling, looking at the corner of the room where the antique mirror was hung. I told this story to my neighbor, Mr. Thomas, an old man who lived 2 doors down from my house. He looked at me very seriously and said that this house had had someone die in the living room more than 30 years ago. A woman named Martha, who lived alone, was found lying motionless in front of the mirror with no signs of murder, only an expression, extreme fear, on my face. After listening, I felt goosebumps all over my body. I asked more, and he said that after she died, the house was sold cheaply. But whoever lived there afterward couldn't stay long because they said they felt like someone was standing in the mirror watching me. I told myself that he was probably just telling a scary story, but a vague worry arose in my heart. That night, I decided to leave the light on all night to watch the mirror. I sat on the sofa, Max lying next to me, his eyes still glued to the glass. The clock hands moved little by little. The ticking sound clearly echoed in the quiet space. At about 3 in the morning, the light in the room began to flicker and then gradually dimmed. I stood up and went to check the power outlet when suddenly I heard a light knock 3 times coming from the mirror. I turned back to look. My heart felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. The mirror began to shake, lightly like the surface of water, even though there was no wind in the room. I saw something moving inside the blurry figure, slowly approaching me. The face was unclear, but the deep black eyes were looking straight at me. I stepped back and tripped over the chair, almost falling. Max growled and barked frantically, then ran towards the stairs. I screamed loudly. The light suddenly turned back on the mirror, became normal, as if nothing had happened. I stood trembling in front of the mirror, looking at myself, pale face, drenched in sweat. I knew I could no longer consider this a coincidence. I used a large cloth to cover the mirror and locked the living room door for the whole next day, but from then on, every night, I still heard the sound of 3 regular knocks from behind the door. Sometimes I even felt a cold breath on my neck when passing through the hallway. The whispers became clearer, as if someone was calling my name in the dark, and what scared me the most was one morning I woke up to find the cloth covering the mirror had been pulled down and lying neatly on the floor, as if someone had taken it off while I was sleeping. It seemed that thing was not only imprisoned in the mirror anymore, but had started to step out, just waiting for me to step into that room one more time. I started living in fear. I couldn't count the number of nights I stayed awake. Every night, the 3-beat knock still rang out regularly from the living room, like a familiar ritual. I tried to ignore it, but my body always tensed up every time that time came. I didn't dare open the door. I just lay quietly listening to every sound coming from downstairs. One time, I clearly heard light footsteps on the wooden floor, the rattle of the doorknob, and a soft sigh. I hugged Max tightly. The dog was trembling, his eyes filled with fear. I knew it wasn't just an illusion. The next morning, I mustered up all my courage and walked into the living room. The mirror was alone on the wall, its shiny surface reflecting my tired face. I tried not to look too deeply, but my eyes seemed to be drawn into the center of the glass. I saw the figure standing behind me, blurry and then disappearing. I turned around. There was no one, only a cold and damp smell like wet soil. I decided to cover the mirror's surface with white paper. But after just one night, when I woke up, the paper was torn to pieces and scattered all over the floor. I heard footsteps walking around the house, the door. The window opened gently and then closed. From then on, I began to hear my name being called at night. The soft, sorrowful voice echoed as if from afar. I tried turning on the lights everywhere, but the light could not chase away the darkness that was creeping around me. One morning, I received a call from Mr. Thomas. He asked if I was okay because last night, he saw the lights in my house flickering all the time and heard the dog barking fiercely. I lied that there was a power outage and turned off the computer, but my heart was in turmoil. I felt like I was living between two worlds where people and shadows were intertwined. I decided to set up a camera to record the living room to see what was really happening. That night, I sat in front of the computer screen and observed through the camera. Everything was normal until 3 in the morning. The mirror began to glow softly. A pale white light spread throughout the room. Then I clearly saw on the screen a shadow of a person standing close to the edge of the mirror, looking straight into the lens. The face was pale. The deep eyes had no pupils, just an endless void. Max started barking continuously. I quickly ran down the stairs. When I got there, the mirror was dark again. But what made me choke was the handprint clearly imprinted on it. The glass surface was damp, as if someone had just touched it from the inside. I shook and wiped it away, but the fingerprints were still there. I didn't know whether to be afraid or pitied the creature. I felt that it was alone and trapped between two worlds, as if it was calling out to me. That feeling made me hesitate. I didn't know if I should break the mirror or find out more. I started looking for information about this antique mirror online and found out that it had belonged to Martha's family, the woman who passed away in my own house. The mirror was said to be her favorite thing, and there were rumors that her soul had been trapped inside since the day she died. That story sent a chill down my spine. I realized that every night I saw it was no coincidence. That mirror was the door where Martha's soul still wandered, trying to find a way back to the world of the living. After knowing that the mirror once belonged to a woman named Martha, I couldn't stop. I searched through all the old records online to find information about her, but there were only a few vague lines. She lived alone in this house for many years after her husband passed away. The neighbors said she often talked to herself in the living room at night, and sometimes they saw a dim light coming from the mirror. After she died, the police recorded a natural death, but no one knew why her face had such a fearful expression. I read that article over and over again dozens of times. Each word seemed to be engraved in my mind. That night, I dreamed of a woman wearing a white dress with long hair covering half her face, standing in front of a mirror with her back to me. In my dream, I heard a weak whisper as if she was asking for help. I woke up with a start, sweat drenching my whole body. Max barked loudly and stared toward the living room. I took a flashlight and walked down the stairs. The light flickered on the wall. I clearly heard a light hiss coming from the mirror. I stopped, my heart pounding in the dim light. I saw a white streak of light moving slowly in the mirror, like a shadow trying to escape. I took a few steps back, then mustered up the courage to ask whose. There, the sound of the wind outside. The window seemed to answer in a vague whisper. I felt the pressure weighing down the thick and cold air. I turned to leave when I heard a loud crash. Something fell to the floor. I turned on the light and saw a small photo fall out. From behind the mirror frame, it was a photo of woman smiling gently, looking exactly like the person in my dream. I brought the photo to the table and looked closely at the back. There was a handwritten line, Martha 1965. Suddenly, from the living room came the usual 3-beat knock sound. Max growled. I held the photo tightly in my hand. The light went out, only moonlight was shining through the curtains. From the darkness I saw the mirror shake slightly, and the image of the woman in the photo slowly appeared. On the glass, her eyes looked at me sadly. I didn't feel scared anymore, but only pity, as if she was stuck between two worlds. I whispered, I will help her rest in peace. As soon as I finished speaking, the room became silent. The air warmed a bit. I thought everything was over, but when I turned away, I saw on the glass a line of words blurred like breath, written, help me. I stood still. My legs had no feeling. I realized the worst thing had not yet begun. That soul needed me, but perhaps was also pulling me closer to her world every day. I sat motionless in front of the mirror, the cold air from which spread throughout the room. The words help me were still clearly visible, as if written in breath. I knew something was trying to contact me, and even though I was extremely scared, I felt a deep pity. I didn't know how, but I wanted to help Martha rest in peace. I started to research how to free a trapped soul. I read many articles about supernatural phenomena and exorcisms, but the more I read, the more confused I became. Some sources said that if a soul is trapped in an object, the release ritual must be performed at the time when the soul is at its weakest, usually in the middle of the night, when the boundaries between the two worlds are the most blurred. That night, I prepared a white candle and a bowl of salt and placed them right in front of the mirror. I turned off all the lights, leaving only the flickering candlelight. Max lay outside in the hallway, refusing to come in. I began to whisper, if Martha is here, please tell me what you want. There was no response, only the crackling of the candle and the sound of the wind whistling through the crack in the door. After a while, the candlelight flickered and the room was completely extinguished. Immersed in the cold darkness, I felt like someone was standing right behind me, breathing. Softly, I turned around and saw nothing, but in the mirror clearly reflected a faint figure standing in the middle of the room with a sad face, deep eyes and tears streaming down. I choked up and softly asked her what she wanted. The figure raised its hand and pointed below the mirror. I looked down and saw a small gap in the loose wooden frame. I pulled gently and discovered inside there was a small notebook covered in old cloth. I opened it, the yellowed pages written in crooked handwriting. This was Martha's diary. She told about the last days of her lonely life after her husband died, and how she believed his soul still lingered in the house. Every night, she stood in front of the mirror, talking to him, until one day she saw his shadow in the mirror. But it was not like before. The face was cold and emotionless. Empty eyes. After that night, she was no longer herself. The last pages were only hastily written a few words, I can't leave here. He saw me. I trembled and closed the notebook and looked up at the mirror. This time there was no more shadow of a person, only my pale face. In a moment, the words on the glass changed from help me to get out. I threw the notebook on the floor. My heart was pounding. Max barked loudly and ran out the door. I ran after him, closing the living room door tightly behind me. From inside the room came the familiar 3 knocks, but this time mixed with a choked cry. I understood that I had just woken something that should have been left alone, and the cry for help wasn't coming from just one soul. I sat motionless in front of the mirror, the cold air from which spread throughout the room. The words "help me" were still clearly visible, as if written in breath. I knew something was trying to contact me, and even though I was extremely scared, I felt a deep pity. I didn't know how, but I wanted to help Martha rest in peace. I started to research how to free a trapped soul. I read many articles about supernatural phenomena and exorcisms, but the more I read, the more confused I became. Some sources said that if a soul is trapped in an object, the release ritual must be performed at the time when the soul is at its weakest, usually in the middle of the night when the boundaries between the two worlds are the most blurred. That night, I prepared a white candle and a bowl of salt and placed them right in front of the mirror. I turned off all the lights, leaving only the flickering candlelight. Max lay outside in the hallway, refusing to come in. I began to whisper, "If Martha is here, please tell me what you want." There was no response, only the crackling of the candle and the sound of the wind whistling through the crack in the door. After a while, the candlelight flickered and the room was completely extinguished. Immersed in the cold darkness, I felt like someone was standing right behind me, breathing. Softly, I turned around and saw nothing, but in the mirror clearly reflected a faint figure standing in the middle of the room with a sad face, deep eyes and tears streaming down. I choked up and softly asked her what she wanted. The figure raised its hand and pointed below the mirror. I looked down and saw a small gap in the loose wooden frame. I pulled gently and discovered inside there was a small notebook covered in old cloth. I opened it, the yellowed pages written in crooked handwriting. This was Martha's diary. She told about the last days of her lonely life after her husband died, and how she believed his soul still lingered in the house. Every night, she stood in front of the mirror talking to him until one day she saw his shadow in the mirror. But it was not like before. The face was cold and emotionless. Empty eyes. After that night, she was no longer herself. The last pages were only hastily written a few words: "I can't leave here." He saw me. I trembled and closed the notebook and looked up at the mirror. This time there was no more shadow of a person, only my pale face. In a moment, the words on the glass changed from "help me" to "get out." I threw the notebook on the floor. My heart was pounding. Max barked loudly and ran out the door. I ran after him, closing the living room door tightly behind me. From inside the room came the familiar 3 knocks, but this time mixed with a choked cry. I understood that I had just woken something that should have been left alone, and the cry for help wasn't coming from just one soul. I thought that leaving that house would end it all, but I was wrong. When I moved to a small apartment in the city center, I felt relieved for a few days. Then it all started again one evening. While I was taking a shower, I heard a soft tap 3 times from the bathroom. Mirror eyes stood still. The water was still running on my shoulders, staring at the steamy mirror. For the moment I saw a dark streak pass behind me. I turned around to see only the blank wall. I gasped, trying to reassure myself that I was imagining it, but when I turned back, the faint words on the mirror appeared as if someone had written with a wet finger, "It's still here." I threw the towel down and ran out of the room. My heart was pounding. That night, I couldn't sleep. Max lay curled up at the foot of the bed, his eyes wide open. Facing the door, I heard a soft sigh, as if coming from inside the wall. Then a weak voice called my name in a long, sad tone. I held my breath, trying not to react, but the quieter it was, the closer the voice got, until it was whispering right next to my ear. I jumped up and turned on the light. Everything was silent. Except for the sound the clock ticked, and the cold yellow light covered the room. I understood that thing had followed me out of the house. It was no longer imprisoned in the mirror, but had followed me like a shadow. I told this story to a friend who worked in the spiritual field. He advised me to bring the mirror to the temple or destroy it immediately because it could be an intermediary to hold the soul. I said that I had left the mirror in the old house, but he just looked at me for a long time and replied that sometimes the intermediary is not an object but the person who touched it. I was cold to realize that he meant that I could have become a bridge between two worlds. The next night, I dreamed that I was standing in the old room. The mirror in front of me was shining dimly. The woman, Martha, was standing on the other side, her hand touching the glass, her eyes pleading. Behind her was a giant black shadow crawling towards me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't speak. I only saw the mirror shattering and thousands of pieces of glass flying towards me. I woke up, my whole body drenched in sweat. But the scary thing was that on my hand was a long scratch, as if it had been cut by a piece of glass. I couldn't explain it. I tried to find everything, how to forget, but every night the triple knocking sound would echo somewhere in the house. Sometimes from the closet, sometimes from the window. I knew it was finding its way back to me, and it seemed to be getting stronger with each time I tried to ignore it. One night, I decided to face it. I sat in the middle of the room, turning off all the lights, only letting the moonlight shine through the window. I said loudly, if Mrs. Martha needed help, I would help her. Please leave me alone immediately. A cold wind blew by, and I heard a voice replying. The trembling voice was not hers, but a man's. I lost it, and now it's your turn. The words echoed and then dissipated in the icy air. I realized the real spirit wasn't Martha, but the one who made her lose her mind, and now it had chosen me to be the next one. The dreams started to come more densely. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same old house appear, but this time the mirror was no longer hanging on the wall, but in the middle of the room. Broken pieces of glass were scattered everywhere. I saw myself walking in between the pieces of mirror, reflecting hundreds of my silhouettes, each with different expressions. Some were crying, some were smiling crookedly, and one of them looked straight at me with eyes as black as an abyss. I was scared and stepped back, but that silhouette kept getting closer and closer until those empty eyes filled my vision. I woke up, my heart was beating erratically. The room was dark, only the blue light of the electronic clock flashing. I broke out in a cold sweat and realized in the small mirror on the table there was steam condensing into the shape of a hand. I knew I couldn't consider this a dream anymore. I found a man named Daniel who was an expert in paranormal research. He listened to my story and said if there really was an evil spirit following me, it would gradually take over my mind by invading my dreams first and then reality. He advised me to face it where it all began. I hesitated, but knew that if I kept running, I would never escape. That night, I returned to the old house. It was pouring rain. The air was thick with a musty smell. I opened the door and walked in and heard the wooden floor creaking with each step. Max's barking echoed faintly behind him. He refused to come closer, just stood staring into the darkness. I turned on the living room light. The weak yellow light shone on the blank wall where the mirror used to hang. Now only a dark mark remained. I felt a chill run down my spine. Then from the darkness came the familiar 3-beat knock. I softly called Martha's name with a trembling voice. A soft reply echoed back, not from a woman, but a low lingering laugh. I stood still and saw a faint black smoke appear in the middle of the room, slowly coalescing into the shape of a tall, thin man. His face was blurred and unclear. His eyes were deep and dark, like a bottomless pit. I backed towards the door, but my legs couldn't move. I felt my body being held tight. The howling wind outside, mixed with the distorted laughter ringing in my head. I heard his voice, as if it were coming from all four sides. "You opened the door, and now it can't be closed anymore." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Only the air was thick around my neck, as if there was a hand squeezing. Then suddenly, Max rushed in, barking fiercely, causing that figure to retreat. I took the opportunity to rush out of the house, slamming the door behind me. The laughter died down, and there was only the sound of rain falling heavily on the roof. I sat down on the ground, breathing heavily and trembling. I understood that Martha's soul was not dangerous. She was just a prisoner, and the real person behind everything was that man's soul, and now he was fully awakened. I stood in the cold rain, looking at the silent old house in front of me. Each raindrop seemed to weigh heavily on my shoulder. Max shivered, huddled close to my feet, his eyes never leaving the opaque window frame. I felt someone was watching from inside the house. The air around was thick with the smell of mold and dust. I took a deep breath and walked closer each step, stepping on the puddle, hearing the puddle sound echo in the night. I pushed the door. It creaked like a sigh. I walked into the living room, where the old mirror used to hang now. Only a long black streak remained on the wall. The light from the flashlight was weak, reflecting a dark space as deep as an abyss. I approached then. The wind blew strongly, causing the window to bang violently. The wall shook slightly, and I heard the familiar 3-beat knock sound coming from the floor. I knelt down to listen, then the knocking sound turned into a weak moan, as if someone was buried underneath. I stepped back to see right in front of me was Martha's diary lying on the wet floor. I opened the last pages. Now there was a new line of sharp writing, trembling, "Help him." I looked around the room, feeling the air was much colder than from the darkness of the stairs. A figure walked down. His face was hidden by wet hair. He walked slowly, without making a sound. His deep eyes reflected the light of my flashlight. I didn't have time to react. My whole body stiffened, my breath caught. I took a step back, but he still moved forward. Each heavy step dragged along with the sound of dripping water. I asked, "Who are you?" but there was no answer, only heard hoarse laughter echoing throughout the room. The sound of wind mixed with laughter created a sound that made my skin crawl. Max barked fiercely, then rushed towards him, but suddenly stopped howling and ran towards the door. I was hypnotized by his empty eyes. For a moment I saw behind him the shadow of a woman. I recognized it was Martha. She raised her hand as if to stop him, then her shadow disappeared into the air. The black figure stopped and bowed his head close to my face. The cold breath exhaled heavily, and I heard a voice resounding right in my head, "You have seen what you shouldn't have seen." I fell to the floor, flashlight broken light flickering on the ceiling, while the black shadow slowly melted into nothingness, leaving a burnt smell and a thin layer of ash around me. I crawled out of the room, panting. The rain was still falling heavily. When I stepped outside, looking back through the window, I saw Martha's silhouette standing inside, looking out her gentle but sad eyes, as if wanting to say goodbye. I stood still for a long time, feeling like she was finally freed, but in the wind still echoed the low laughter of that man. I understood that he had not disappeared. He had just temporarily retreated, and maybe one day he would come back to me or someone else. Accidentally touched that mirror again. After that rainy night, I moved out of the old town, carrying with me the haunting of laughter in the dark. I rented a small apartment in another city, trying to start a normal life again, but the fear did not leave me easily. The first nights, I slept soundly, but by the third week, everything returned. One evening, while watching TV, I heard a familiar 3-beat knock sound coming from the wall behind me. I stood up, trying to listen, then that low laughter rang out again, slowly lingering in the silence. I turned off the TV, stood in the middle of the room, only the sound of my heartbeat and the cold air spreading from the floor. I stepped back toward the window and suddenly saw a blurry black figure reflected on the glass right behind me. I turned around, but there was no one. I knew he had found me. I tried every way to dispel that feeling. I turned on all the lights in the house, turned on the music really loud, but every time the melody stopped, I heard a faint breath right next to my ear. I no longer knew what was real and what was imaginary. I told Daniel the story. He only said in a serious tone that the spirit had bonded with me through the energy cord from the first time I looked in the mirror, and to help me he had to perform a ritual to cut the connection. I agreed without hesitation. That night Daniel came with white silk candles and a small mirror. He told me to look in the mirror and call the spirit's name to force it to appear. I hesitated, but then closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and called Martha's name before opening my eyes. I saw in the mirror her face appeared sad, but gentle eyes behind her. A dark shadow was gradually approaching, I heard. Daniel read prayers. The wind suddenly got stronger. The candle light flickered. The dark shadow began to distort. His loud voice echoed throughout the room. "You can't escape." I saw the mirror shake violently, then shatter. Thousands of pieces of glass flew everywhere. Daniel fell to the floor, and I was stunned, only just in time to see a puff of black smoke retract into the curtain and disappear. I collapsed to the floor. The room was silent, only the sound of rain falling outside the window. When I woke up, Daniel had left on the table, leaving a written note: "If the laughter returned, burn everything that could reflect." I followed and broke the glass window covering black cloth. I lived in the dim light of the small lamp, not daring to look at anything that could reflect. A few weeks later, everything seemed fine, until one night I heard a familiar laugh coming from my phone as the screen lit up, reflecting my face. But in that reflection, I saw his deep black eyes looking back. I threw the phone to the floor and understood that there were curses that could never cut him free from being tied in the mirror, because I myself had now become his new mirror. After the night the phone started laughing, I started losing control of myself. Every time I saw my reflection, I saw my face distorted, my smile crooked, and my eyes gradually darkening. I no longer knew what was reality and what was an illusion. Every morning when I washed my face, I tried to avoid looking in the mirror, but I still felt like there were eyes watching from behind. I found myself talking to myself as if someone was answering in my head. I tried to call Daniel, but the phone only made a weak buzzing sound, then a familiar sigh. I started hearing the 3-beat knocking sound everywhere, on the walls and ceiling. Even in my sleep, it was like the heartbeat of some soul merging with me. One evening, I felt like my body no longer belonged to me. I stood in front of the mirror. In the darkness, the moonlight shone through the crack in the window, and I saw my reflection started to move differently from me. I backed away, but the figure in the mirror kept moving. I clearly saw in its eyes the black, glittering light and the cold smile. I screamed and hit the mirror, but no sound came out, only saw cracks spreading like a spider web. The reflection in the mirror raised her hand to touch the glass. I felt something touch my hand. It was cold and sticky. I pulled hard but couldn't pull it out. The coldness spread through my arm. My heart was pounding, and then everything went dark when I woke up. I found myself lying on the floor, breathing heavily. The room was dark, with only a faint light from the table lamp. I crawled to the mirror and saw the reflection was normal, but my eyes were no longer the same. They were deeper and darker, as if something was moving inside. I heard a whisper in my head, "You will understand what it feels like to be trapped." I clearly felt another voice in my head, laughing softly whenever I was scared. I tried to fight it by praying. I turned on music and opened the windows to let the light in, but every time I looked into the darkness, I saw him standing there looking at me through every reflective surface. I no longer went out during the day. I was afraid of the light, because in the light, I saw more clearly what was living inside me. I started writing everything down in a notebook, hoping that if someone found it, they would know what had happened. I wrote until midnight. Then I hear the familiar 3-beat knock, this time not from the wall, but from inside my head. Each beat makes my heart ache. I raise my head to look in the mirror and see my face smiling, even though I'm not smiling. Every movement in the reflection starts to lose rhythm with mine. Then it speaks my voice, but it's his. I know I've lost. I can no longer feel the fear, only emptiness remains. He's taken over everything, my gaze, my smile, and even my breath. I'm now just the person standing behind the mirror, looking out at this world through his eyes, waiting for someone foolish enough to come close so he can be free again. From that day on, I lived like a prisoner in my own body. Everything around me seemed to be covered in a layer of fog. There was no sound, only a small laugh echoed in my head every time I tried to sleep. I couldn't avoid mirrors forever, because everywhere there was something that reflected light, whether it was the water in a glass or the window shade. Every time I saw my image, I knew he was there waiting. My body still worked, still walked and ate, but I wasn't in control anymore. I could only observe, like someone standing outside the glass. I remember every feeling of fear at first. Then, it gradually disappeared, as if my emotions were also swallowed by him. The apartment I lived in became cold. The light dimmed every day. The furniture gradually covered in dust. No one came to visit anymore. Maybe because I no longer contacted anyone. The phone kept ringing, but I couldn't pick it up. I could only see on the screen the reflection of those bottomless black eyes, his eyes. One evening, I heard the familiar 3-beat knock sound, this time coming from inside the mirror. The small mirror on the table shook slightly. Then a deep, hoarse voice said, "I've waited a long time. Now it's my turn." I looked in the mirror and saw him walking forward with each step, as if making the room darken. The cold air filled the place. I tried to move, but it was useless. My body stiffened. He touched the glass. I felt my skin numb, and then everything went dark when I opened my eyes. I found myself standing in a strange, misty space, surrounded by pale light. In front of me were thousands of pieces of mirror floating in the air. Each piece reflected my silhouette, but all had different eyes. I realized I was trapped in his world. I screamed and begged, but no one heard. I saw him on the other side of the mirror, controlling my body in real life. He smiled in relief, then turned away. I hit my hand on the mirror, but couldn't get through. I could only watch him live my life, meeting people I knew, laughing and talking as if he were me. Every time night fell, I saw him looking in the mirror, slightly tilting his head and smiling, while I, on this side, could only look back with lifeless eyes. I don't know how much time has passed in this place. Time doesn't exist. There is only darkness and countless repeating images again. I heard other voices echoing in the mist. One was a woman's voice. I guessed it was Martha, and many others, all weakly calling for help. I realized I wasn't the first person to be trapped here, and I wouldn't be the last. He survives by taking over the souls of those who happened to look at him for too long, and now all I can do is wait until someone else is foolish enough to look into the mirror where he lives, so he can be free again, and I will disappear forever. I wandered in that misty space. There was no concept of day or night. Everything seemed frozen in an endless moment. The floating pieces of mirrors reflected thousands of suffering faces. Some were crying, some were whispering for help. Some were just silently looking at me with empty eyes. I called out to them, but no one answered. Only the echo of my own voice echoed weakly. I walked forever in the cold mist until I heard very light footsteps from behind me. I turned around and saw a woman with long hair and a faint face appear. I realized it was Martha. She smiled sadly and said in a soft voice, "Finally, you've seen me." I asked her where this was. She looked around and replied that this place was the memory of those whose souls were possessed. Every person who looked at him was sucked into this reflective world. No one could escape. I looked around and saw more human figures appear. All of them were as faint as smoke. They stood silently, looking in a distant direction where a faint white light flickered. Martha said that was the only door leading out, but it only opened when someone else out there looked in. "Mirror, if not, we will stay here forever." I asked if there was any way to destroy him. She shook her head. "He lives. On fear he exists for those who believe in him. The more afraid he is, the stronger." I listened to her story and felt a small ray of hope. Maybe if I just stop being afraid, he will weaken. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, trying to dispel the fear in my head, but at that moment I heard a familiar laughter ringing round the space, shaking violently. Pieces of mirror hit each other and shattered. Martha shouted, "He knows you are trying to fight him. Run away." I didn't know where to run, but my feet kept rushing towards that dim light. The closer I got, the louder the laughter got. I felt the cold air go through my body. Then I saw thousands of hands reaching out to pull me back. Each hand was cold as ice. I struggled to get free, and in that moment I saw a blinding light flood. I fell to the hard ground, waking up in the middle of a strange room. I realized I was in an antique shop surrounded by old dusty objects, and in front of me was a large shiny mirror reflecting my image. I looked closely and realized I was still there, but the reflection was slowly changing. My face faded away, and instead, it was the face of that man. He smiled at me. I stood still, knowing that the light I saw was not freedom, but the last trap he created to make me believe that I was free so he could completely take me forever. I stood still in front of the mirror in the antique shop, where the weak yellow light shone through the dusty window frame. The air was thick with the smell of dampness and old wood. I looked into the glass and saw my own reflection, but something was wrong. My eyes were darker than usual, and in the depths of my eyes it seemed like there was a shadow moving. I gently touched the glass. The cold feeling passed through my fingertips, like touching the surface of winter water. In that moment I heard a small laugh, very softly, ringing from deep within the mirror, as if echoing from a faraway place. I jerked my hand away. My heart was pounding. Then I heard the back door of the shop creak open. An old man walked in with a tired, hazy look. In his eyes he asked me in a hoarse voice, "Who let you in here?" I was about to answer, but the words got stuck. My throat was dry. He stared at me, then suddenly stepped back, his face pale as if he had just seen something terrible. He trembled and said, "You are not the last person to have stepped out of that mirror." I stood still, not understanding what he meant. He turned away to look for something in the drawer, then took out a photo. The old man gave it to me. In the photo was a man with a face that was frighteningly similar to mine, but his eyes were completely different, deep and emotionless. He said that this person had bought that mirror in 1972 and disappeared right in this very store. Since then, no one dared to sell that item again. I trembled and realized that I was standing in front of the same mirror. I bent down to look closely and saw that the wooden frame had old scratches, exactly like the ones I had seen in Martha's house. I stepped back, but the eyes in the mirror did not move with me, but stood still and looked straight ahead. I took a deep breath, tried to stay calm, and then asked the old man where this mirror came from. He replied that it had belonged to a woman named Martha and was returned after she passed away. I felt my heart tighten. Everything had returned to the starting point. I looked around the store and saw different mirrors hanging all over the wall. Each mirror reflected a dim light, as if there was a slight movement. I felt dozens of eyes were watching me. I turned around and was about to leave when I heard the sound of broken glass. A mirror next to me cracked from the middle of the glass, spreading like a spider web, and in it I could clearly see my face. The man's face with deep black eyes, a crooked smile slowly appeared. He spoke in my voice. "I told you we are one." I stepped back, hitting the shelves, making everything crash down. The light flickered as he slowly walked out through the mirror. Shards fell all around him, but didn't cut my skin. I ran to the door, but the door was locked. I banged hard, but it was useless. Laughter echoed throughout the space, and every mirror in the shop started to shake, as if speaking at the same time. I saw his image in every shard of mirror. Every one had my eyes. I realized I had nowhere to hide. I closed my eyes and screamed then. Suddenly, the air around me fell silent when I opened my eyes. I was standing in the middle of hundreds of mirrors, reflecting myself. Each silhouette looked at me and smiled. I suddenly understood that I had never left the world in the mirror, and that the antique shop was just the place he took me to complete the soul swap forever. I don't know how long I've been in the maze of mirrors. Everything around me is the same. The pale light has no end. I keep walking, but I still see myself reflected endlessly. Every figure in the mirror seems more alive than before. I see them moving slowly with a smile on their lips. While I stand still, I try not to look, but the feeling of being surrounded makes my mind explode. I start to hear whispers mixed with weak breathing echoing throughout the space. I realize those voices are not just mine, but also those of other imprisoned souls. They say incoherent words, like "Please help us, don't believe him, I'm trapped here." I try to walk to the nearest mirror. I put my hand on the glass. I feel a strange warmth spreading from inside, then in. The mirror appears Martha's face. She looks at me with sad eyes. I ask if there is any way out. She just shakes her head slightly and says he doesn't want to leave this world. He wants all of us. Martha just finished speaking. Her image disappears, replaced by his face. His face is distorted, eyes deep as an endless pit. He laughed and said, "I told you no one will leave this place." I stepped back, but behind me were also mirrors. Hundreds of his faces appeared in each glass, and at the same time, they laughed loudly. The laughter echoed, making the space vibrate as if it had come to life. I ran in panic and broke each mirror, but each time a mirror broke, another one appeared to replace it. I felt like I was falling into an endless loop. I was tired. I sat down in the middle of the maze. My laughter gradually faded, only the sound of cold wind blowing. I closed my eyes, hoping it was just a nightmare. When I opened them, I saw a small glimmer of light in front of me. I stood up and moved closer. Each step, the light got clearer. I realized it was a small gap between two mirrors. I tried to squeeze through my hand. I touched the cold space on the other side. I saw a real room with yellow light. I screamed for help. The sound echoed everywhere, but no one heard me. I hit the glass hard until blood flowed on my hand. Then from the other side, I saw a woman walk into the room. I realized it was the new owner of the mirror. She was wiping the dust off the wooden frame and had no idea that inside there was me looking out. I tried to shout not to look at it, but she stopped and started staring deep into the mirror. Her eyes blurred, and then I saw him standing right behind her, smiling. I banged on the glass, desperately knowing that the cycle was starting again and the next soul was about to be trapped, and I would just be one of the whispers in the mirror maze forever. The woman stood in front of the mirror. The light from the window shone on her face, making the scene blurry like an old painting. I looked from inside and saw myself, trembling helplessly as she bent down to wipe the dust off the wooden frame and slowly looked straight into the glass. I wanted to scream and break everything, but I couldn't. Every time I touched the glass, I only felt the cold that penetrated my heart. She looked around the shop and then got closer, her eyes surprised when she saw the reflection wavering like water. I saw him slowly appear behind her, his face blurry, his eyes deep. He put his hand on her shoulder. The light in the mirror flashed and then went out. Everything fell into silence, and when the light returned, only he and I were left standing in the middle of the endless reflective space. I knew her soul had been pulled here like I was before. He looked at me and smiled, his deep voice resounding. Each soul made me stronger. I stepped back, trembling, and asked him what he wanted. He replied that I just wanted to see fear because it was what fed me. I asked why he chose me. He tilted his head slightly and replied, "Because you looked at me too much." For a long time, I felt cold all over and gradually understood that the mirror is just a door and human fear is the key to open it. The more I resisted him, the stronger he became. I looked around and saw other souls trapped. They were quietly floating in space like shadows. I tried to find Martha, but only saw white mist covering. I asked him if they could escape. He chuckled and said escape was just an illusion. No one had ever left this place, including me. I was surprised and asked again if he couldn't escape, how could he still possess a human body? He looked straight at me. His black eyes were bottomless and said, "Because every time we possess a body, we are also trapped in it, never completely free." He stepped closer to me, with each step making the space vibrate. The pieces of mirror around reflecting hundreds of his faces. I clearly saw despair in my eyes and understood that even though he had power, he was also a captive. He needed me to continue to exist, like I needed a way out. I tried to think of a way, but every thought vanished in the echoing laughter. I closed my eyes and begged someone out there never to touch the mirror. Again, I opened my eyes to see the image of the woman who just disappeared, standing far away, her hand tightly holding Martha's old diary. I understand that she is Martha's descendant and may hold the key to liberation. I scream for her to destroy the mirror immediately, but my voice cannot be heard outside. Only the mist sways. He realizes it. His eyes coldly look at me, saying, "It's too late." The door is open. I see a red light spread around the room, shaking. The trapped souls begin to deform. Screams echoed throughout the space. I see him raise his hand towards the light, and everything disappears into nothingness. When I open my eyes, I am standing in the middle of a ruined antique shop. The mirror is shattered under my feet, but in each small piece of mirror still reflects his black eyes, and I know he hasn't really disappeared, just waiting for the next soul to look in to start a new loop. I stood in the middle of the ruined antique shop. The cold from the broken glass spread across the floor. Each step I took made a light cracking sound like the groans of imprisoned souls. I bent down to pick up a small piece of mirror. The dim light reflected my face, but deep inside there were other eyes staring at me. Black eyes without pupils, reflecting a dim red light. I threw the mirror on the ground, but the echoes came from everywhere, like dozens of voices whispering my name. I felt the air was heavy and hard to breathe. All the objects in the shop began to shake, as if something was waking up. I stepped back and heard the sound of the back door opening. A cold wind rushed in, carrying with it a familiar, musty smell. I heard footsteps slowly approaching, each step echoing in my head like the sound of metal rubbing against stone. I turned my head and saw no one, but my shadow on the wall grew longer, twisted, then split into two figures. One stood still, the other slowly raised its head and smiled. I stepped back toward the main door, but when my hand touched the doorknob, it was cold and wouldn't open. I looked around at every door. The doors all disappeared, leaving only the mirrors hanging on the walls. They shook slightly, then gradually. Lit up inside appeared the images of each person who had been trapped before I saw Martha. Her eyes were sad, and next to her was the woman who had just been dragged in. She tried to reach out from the glass, but everything was just nothingness. I shouted, asking what they wanted. Martha's voice rang out weakly. We didn't want revenge, just wanted to rest. He wouldn't let anyone be at peace. I asked where he was, then the deep laughter rang out again right behind me. We never left. I turned around to see him standing in the middle of the room. His figure faded, but his eyes still burned with red light. He said, "You opened the door for me, and now the door can never be closed." I saw the pieces of mirror shake stronger. The red light glowed throughout the room. The fog was so thick I couldn't breathe. He came closer, reaching out to touch my shoulder. It was so cold it paralyzed. I screamed, trying to struggle, but my legs felt like they were stuck to the floor. I heard the sound of thousands of souls screaming around me. Then all the light went out. When I opened my eyes, everything was silent. I found myself standing on the street in the morning. The sun was shining down warm, as if nothing had ever happened. I walked through the crowd of people passing by. It felt strange, as everyone avoided my gaze. I went near the window of a store to look at my face again, and when I looked, I saw the face was still familiar, but the eyes were darker than ever, and in the reflection behind me, he was smiling. I understood that he didn't need to imprison me anymore, because he was inside me, and a new loop had just begun, until someone accidentally looked into these eyes and saw themselves in them. I walked through the crowd, feeling like the whole world around me was fading away, leaving only the sound of my heartbeat and my own. Heavy breathing people unconsciously avoided my gaze. As I passed by, they glanced and quickly turned away. I walked into a nearby coffee shop, sat down in a hidden corner. The dim light through the glass window reflected my familiar face, but in the depths of my eyes, there was a small movement like black smoke. I tried to avoid looking in the mirror, but every reflective surface became a door for him to follow, from the coffee cup to the metal spoon, all of his shadow. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, but in my head, a small laugh echoed in his low voice. He said it was easy to make them look into your eyes with just one look. I stood up in panic, spilling coffee on the table. The black liquid spread out in a strange shape, like a human face. Everyone in the shop looked at me strangely. I left awkwardly outside. The sky was heavy gray. I walked along the street. I saw, in the large glass of the roadside shop, my reflection smiling while my face was completely calm. I felt a chill run down my spine and stepped back, but the figure in the mirror didn't take its eyes off me. It slowly raised its hand and placed it on the mirror, and I clearly saw the hand in the reflection black as smoke. I turned away and ran as fast as I could, but no matter where I looked, I saw him, that black figure, following me through every window, every car glass, every building window. I heard laughter coming from everywhere. I ran to the park where there was no reflection, only a still lake. I sat down and looked at the water, hoping to see myself normal again. But when the water was still, I saw my face gradually disappearing in the water, and instead was his image. His face was distorted and his eyes were dark. I stepped back. The lake water suddenly turned black and countless hands reached out from it. I got up and ran away from that place until I fell down on the sidewalk, gasping for breath. Passers-by looked at me in fear. I tried to calm down, but when I raised my head and looked at the bus window parked nearby, I saw inside the reflection, not me, but dozens of his different faces, all smiling. I felt like he was using my eyes to find a successor. Continued to look at him. I clenched my hands and closed my eyes, but in my head, I heard his voice, as light as a breath. This time, no mirror needed, just a look. I opened my eyes to see a young girl standing in front of me, looking at me with worried eyes, asking if I was okay. I panicked and turned away, but it was too late. I saw in her eyes my reflection, and the shadow behind the dim light flashed. I understood that the loop continued, and the next soul was chosen just because of a look. The young girl looked at me with a look of surprise, mixed with fear. I tried to step back, but it was too late. In that moment, I saw a dark shadow pass between the two of us, like a thin smoke. Into her body she stopped. Her eyes opened wide, then fell to the ground. I panicked and called out to the people around, but no one stopped. It seemed like they didn't see us. I bent down to grab her cold hand and trembled slightly. A voice rang in my head, as light as a breath. Once again, the loop started. I looked around. The space gradually faded. Only the sound of wind and deep laughter echoed everywhere. The light of the afternoon faded, leaving behind a thick darkness. I stood up and looked towards the nearest glass door, in which now reflected the image of the girl opening her eyes. Her face was lifeless. Her eyes were black like an abyss, and I understood that he had chosen her as the new host. I took each step back. My heart was beating hard, but her eyes still clung to me like an invisible string pulling me closer. I tried to escape, but my legs couldn't move. He was pulling me back. I felt the cold spread throughout my body. A part of my soul was pulled back into the mirror, I screaming in vain, but the scream only echoed in my head. I saw him standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders like a victor. He turned his head to look at me and smiled. I understood that I couldn't save her, just like no one had ever saved me before. When the girl left that place, I still saw my reflection, trapped in the glass behind the passers-by, walking by without knowing that in every reflective surface there were still eyes watching them. I gradually felt myself being erased. My memories were as thin as smoke. I could only hear his voice in my head. Everyone has a fear, and that fear is the path we step out into the world. I saw him using her eyes to look around the crowd, smiling lightly, and others, when accidentally looking in too. That gaze would feel cold without knowing why. When she left, I still stood there, in the dark, among thousands of reflections of myself, each distorted face smiling exactly like him. I understood that he no longer needed mirrors. He had found a way to exist among humans through the eyes of weak and scared people. And now I am just a faint echo in the wind, a soul trapped between two worlds with no rest. I just wish someone was strong enough to look straight at him, without fear of letting the final door close forever. But until that happens, the cursed gaze continues to spread, and every time you catch someone else's eyes in the middle of the night, remember, it might be him looking at you, waiting for you to look back to start a new cycle. I was just a faint soul floating in the void, where darkness intersected with light. I didn't know how many years had passed. I only saw him still existing, still smiling, still walking through the human world through the eyes of weak and scared people. But then one day, I felt a change in the cold energy around me. A dim light appeared at the end of the road, reflecting him looking at another person this time. It was a young girl with a calm face and unwavering eyes. I saw him standing behind her, smiling slightly. His hands reached out like he had done to so many people before, but this time the light from the mirror suddenly flashed so strong that he had to step back. The girl wasn't afraid. On the contrary, she moved closer, looking deep into his eyes, and said in a determined voice, "I'm not afraid of you," he roared. The sound echoed throughout the surrounding space. I felt everything shake, the screams of hundreds of souls resounding and blending together. The light in the mirror burned. Like a white flame, I saw the pieces of the mirror shatter and fly everywhere like thousands of small dots of light. The souls imprisoned for so long began to gradually dissolve in the light. They smiled before disappearing. I saw Martha's gentle eyes. She nodded slightly at me, then dissolved into a light mist that floated up. I felt my body gradually lighten, all the burdens leaving my mind. His laughter faded until there was only complete silence. I knew he was weakening because no one was afraid of him anymore. The light of that girl was like a fire that dispelled the last darkness when everything was quiet. I saw myself standing in front of the mirror again, but this time I was no longer afraid. I smiled, looking at my reflection. No longer had deep black eyes, but a normal warm gaze like a human. I heard the wind gently passing through my ears. A small whisper sounded like a goodbye. Thank you for not letting fear win. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in the middle of a dusty room. The sunlight shone through the window onto the old mirror, now cracked, but there was no longer any darkness inside, only a soft light reflecting the sky outside. I understood that the last loop had ended. That girl had broken the curse and freed all souls, including me. I put my hand on the remaining piece of mirror and felt the warmth spread throughout my body, and then the light swept me away. I knew I was about to rest, but before I disappeared, I heard someone's footsteps approaching the shop. The door opened and a man's voice said, "This mirror is beautiful. How much is it?" I wanted to scream, but the sound was gone. The light faded, leaving only the sound of the wind blowing gently through the door frame. In a small piece of mirror, hidden among the broken pieces, deep black eyes opened again, like a warning that no loop ever truly ends. Only souls continue to wait for someone who dares to look into it, to start it all over again.